Hi, you are once again listening to an After Dinner Conversation magazine podcast. After Dinner Conversation believes humanity is improved by ethics and morals grounded in philosophical truth. And that truth is discovered through intentional reflection and respectful debate. In order to facilitate this process, we've created a growing series of print books, a monthly short story magazine, and 2 different podcasts. This podcast, Philosophy, Ethics, Short Story Audiobooks, provides audiobook readings of stories that have appeared in our magazine, and our companion podcast, Philosophy, Ethics, Short Story Discussions, is where we discuss the ethics of the choices made in the stories in a way to model the kinds of discussions we hope you're having about these readings with friends, family, or students. Hello once again. I am your narrator and host, Colby, and I'm also the creator of After Dinner Conversation Publishing. Thank you for spending your time listening to our podcast and for reading the magazine. Thank you for supporting us through your magazine subscriptions and through patreon.com/After Dinner Conversation. And of course, if you enjoy this audiobook reading, please subscribe to our podcast, share it on social media, and suggest it to friends. Referrals of podcasts from friends are by far how we are most successful in growing our listenership, so thank you very much. Okay, today's story is called Monsters. It is the final story in the January 2021 magazine. It is by Ana Carolina Pereira. Let's get started. The ice cream truck rolled down the street where the Picketts lived. It passed slowly and kept on going towards the park where 3 blocks away its siren song got lost in the distance like a popsicle melting in the heat of that summer day. Nancy was lying in bed with her daughter, Carrie Mae. Both dozed under the canopy of the child's 4-poster bed. The canopy curtains were white with pink lace flowers, and they matched the motif of the wallpaper, a repeated pattern of a delicate bouquet of roses. Most things in the room had touches of pink and white. Outside, a blue jay landed on a branch of the oak tree that stood next to the house, chirped its heart out for a few seconds, and then flew away. It was a soft and sweet afternoon in a strawberry vanilla little girl's room. Activated by the truck's music, Carrie Mae got up from her bed and began to jump. Her 2 thick braided ponytails, which Nancy had made for her in the morning and tied with brightly colored elastic bands, bounced lively in all directions. "Did you hear it, Ma? An ice cream truck. Buy me an ice cream, please." Nancy had not seen her daughter so happy since they moved to that house just 2 weeks ago. "All right, Carrie Mae. Let's see what the ice cream man brought today." As soon as she said those words, Nancy regretted them. Her first impulse had been to say no, to make up some excuse not to leave their small heaven. But her daughter's enthusiasm had disarmed her. It was Saturday afternoon, and the park must be full of people. Nancy imagined herself standing on the grass, holding hands with Carrie Mae, surrounded by those strangers, and shuddered. The scene resembled a nightmare that had been visiting her for the past few days. The crowd approaching them closed in on both of them, slowly choking them like a boa constrictor. She went with her daughter to the bathroom and helped her wash her hands. Then she retouched her makeup, applied some hairspray to her bob, checked that there was enough change and a new bag of tissues in her purse, and went outside. Melvin was in the front yard, dipping a brush into a can of light blue paint, his face varnished with sweat. It was the 3rd time he had to paint the outside of the house, and Nancy was already beginning to hate that color. As soon as he saw his wife and daughter, Melvin smiled and then raised his eyebrows when he noticed that Nancy was carrying her purse. "I'm going with Carrie Marie to the park to get some ice cream," she said. The smile vanished from Melvin's face. He frowned, a reflex, fear. First he tried to dissuade Nancy from going. Then he wanted to go with them. Impatient with the delay, Carrie Mae tugged at her mother's skirt several times. "Hurry up, the ice cream cart is leaving, Ma." "Let me finish talking with your dad, dear. The ice cream man isn't going anywhere yet," Nancy said to the child as she took her hand. Then she looked seriously at her husband. "I don't think they'll do anything to us. They wouldn't dare. And this has to stop, Melvin. going together everywhere, joined at the hip like Siamese twins. You stay here and finish what you're doing. I'll let you know if something happens." "Really? How?" Melvin took a handkerchief from his pocket with an impatient gesture and wiped the sweat off his face. "I'll yell. You're always telling me that I speak loud, that my voice is too strong, no? If we don't come back in half an hour, you go look for us. See you in a while, Mel." Without waiting for her husband's reply and without looking back, Nancy began to walk away from the house with Carrie Mae, feeling Melvin's eyes glued to her back. She held her daughter's hand tight. Nothing, not even a tornado, could separate them. They were both sweating, Carrie Mae because of the heat, and she because of the anxiety. The child trotted along beside her mother and sang, ice cream man, ring the bell, 1 scoop, 2 scoops, 3 scoops, strawberry, chocolate, pecan. Quick, give the cone before they melt." Nancy counted the steps in silence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was only 3 blocks to the park. How many steps were at that distance? They walked by a house with a for sale sign, freshly planted in the ground. It seemed to Nancy that the sign was shaped like a giant hand pointing its index finger to the two of them. As they were about to reach the park, they saw the neighbors coming out of there in a hurry. They looked scared and were talking to each other with big gestures, but as soon as they saw Nancy and Carrie Mae, their countenance shifted from fear to disgust. One man, walking on the opposite sidewalk, spat in their direction. No one greeted them. Carrie Mae stopped singing and trotting and began to walk very close to her mother, with her head down. Nancy kept her back straight and her chin up, while she felt her daughter shrinking beside her, as if trying to disappear. She wished Carrie Mae were a chick and she a giant bird to cover her, to protect her with her wings, to tear and drill with her beak the flesh of anyone who dared to hurt her child. She wanted to be a mother bird with huge wings. They crossed the street and arrived at the park. It was empty but for the ice cream truck, painted in pink, white and mint green, with giant vanilla cones on the sides. There didn't appear to be any threats nearby. Perhaps the neighbors had learned that the two were headed to the park and decided to humiliate them once again by leaving them there, like a couple of lepers. Carrie Mae returned to her usual exuberance. She started running through the grass, pulling her mother's hand, who didn't let go, not yet. They traversed the park towards the truck. The ice cream man was in there, with his back turned on them. Nancy hoisted her daughter up and perched her on her hip so that she could look inside. The girl was getting bigger and heavier, and Nancy realized that it wouldn't be too long before she stopped lifting her for good. She thought that the day she picked her up for the last time would go unnoticed to both of them. It would be just like any other. She wished there was something, a tangible object she could put in a scrapbook to commemorate that sad occasion. A postcard with a picture of the two that said, "The last time I picked up my daughter." "Hello, ice cream man," shouted Carrie Mae. The man turned around, and Nancy was so surprised that she almost ran away in fear. Carrie Mae screamed and buried her head on her mother's shoulder, covering her eyes with her hand. Huge, dark, violet lumps populated the man's face. It seemed as if an epidemic of bright tumors similar to eggplants had taken over, and that they were on the verge of exploding. A few small areas were free of lumps, and there the skin was white, the bone structure harmonious. Perhaps, without his condition, he would have been a handsome man, tall, slender, and broad-shouldered, but like this, he was the ugliest person Nancy had ever set eyes on. She took a couple of steps back and pressed her daughter against her chest, but then she managed to control herself and kept her gaze on the eyes and mouth of the man. Eyes that were blue and lively, and a mouth that smiled at her with perfect white teeth, one of the few smiles she had seen on the streets of Windsor Woods. "What are you two beautiful ladies having today? Marshmallow mint, Hawaiian sherbet, banana strawberry, coconut fudge? Those are the day's specials, delicious for a Sunday afternoon." The man said this beaming, as if he were one of those cheesy TV announcers. As if he were handsome. He wore his impeccable soda jerk outfit with flair, a white short-sleeved shirt, accessorized with a black bow tie and a white hat. Their unease didn't seem to bother him a bit, and this somehow reassured Nancy. "2 banana strawberry cones, just 1 scoop, please." Jolly good choice, ma'am. They'll be ready in a minute. Nancy hadn't thought for quite a while about little Marcus, a childhood neighbor who had had a deformed and very thick leg like that of an elephant. Her mother always warned her and her siblings that they should be good to little Marcus because his cross was already too heavy. One time Nancy's mother overheard her brother Tom, the second oldest of her children, making a joke about the boy, saying that maybe someone should prick his leg with needles to deflate it so that his cross wouldn't be so heavy. She took Tom by the ear and dragged him to another room, where she chastised her son and made him stay for the rest of the day. While the man was scooping the ice cream, Nancy felt how Carrie May's tense body relaxed. She saw how her daughter withdrew her hand from her face and peeked at the stranger with her left eye, somewhere between frightened and curious. Here we go. The man extended a banana-strawberry cone, not knowing whom to hand it to. Take the cone, dear, said Nancy. Carrie May reached out an undecided hand, trying not to look at the man. What do you say? Thank you, the girl uttered in a whisper. Nancy put the child down on the sidewalk and told her to go to the park. Ambling to the playground, Carrie May took turns licking the ice cream cone and turning to watch her mother and the stranger. Nice neighborhood. Have you lived here for long? Said the man as he scooped the other ice cream. My name is Tom, by the way. Nice to meet you, Tom. I'm Nancy. No, we just moved. We're still getting used to it. You're the only ones here, I suppose. I mean, I was just greeted by some of your neighbors, he said sarcastically as he handed Nancy her cone. That's right. We're the only ones. Nancy kept wondering whether they had done the right thing by moving to Windsor Woods. On paper, it seemed like a great idea. It was a suburb-style neighborhood just 15 minutes from downtown where Melvin worked an office job. The school was good, not overcrowded, and with only one shift. Trees lined the streets, and everything looked well-tended and pleasant, like a postcard of the American dream. The house had 3 rooms, one for the couple, one for Carrie May, and one for the baby they expected to conceive soon. At last, they would go from tenants to homeowners. Despite these advantages, she balked initially at the idea of buying the house, knowing that for many of their potential neighbors, people like them were a stain that had to be erased from the postcard of the American dream. But Melvin ended up convincing her. Sometimes she almost hated him for that. With each new humiliation by the neighbors, the rage she felt towards them was transferred to Melvin, amplified. I guess they haven't made things too easy for you, said Tom. I've seen what they've done in other neighborhoods. Those so-called church-going, God-fearing folks. For an instant, his face turned sour. You guessed right. It could be worse, I know. In Woodland, they burned a house down the other day. In Roseland, they broke the windows of another. Here they haven't gone that far, though it's been exhausting. People like that, they want things to be a certain way, their way. And when they see stuff shifting, they take it badly. I know them all too well. But you're doing the right thing. It's none of my business, of course, and it's hard to walk in someone else's shoes. But if I was you, I'd stay put. Well, we may have no other choice, at least for now. Nancy licked the ice cream and held back the tears that were starting to blur her vision. Melancholy overcame her as she remembered the lazy Sunday afternoon spent hanging out and talking to her friends in her old neighborhood. Can I tell you a story, Miss Nancy? Go ahead, Tom. As a child, my mother kept me locked up all day and only took me out at night now and then. When she left home without me, she tied me with a rope to the bars of the bed. She said that people shouldn't have to see a monster like me, that I scared them. But I was scared to death of people too. Tell me who gets the most frightened, the person who fears a spider because it seems hideous to them, or the spider facing a giant that can crush it with one foot? You have a point, but try to explain that to someone who's beside himself because a huge spider is crawling on his lap. Nancy recalled that the real estate agent had shown them the house at night. They went in to see it camouflaged by the dark, hidden from the neighbors like criminals. All the same, I believe it's necessary to educate folks, Miss Nancy. Maybe that's why people like me came into this world. When I turned 6, my mother ran away with someone she just met, a good-for-nothing lecher. She was always falling hook and sinker for those, An uncle and his wife, who weren't blessed with children, took me in and raised me as their son. Best thing that ever happened to me. They went with me everywhere and were always so proud of their boy. Little by little, they took the shame off me. The ugly duckling turned into a swan, well, so to speak. His laughter had a tinge of sadness in it. He went on, "Thanks to them, I don't become a freak both inside and out. I know it's hard for others to get used to my face, and I'll never get used to the staring, the whispers, the jokes, all that. But I like being outside, around people. I won't spend my life locked up just to keep others from being uncomfortable. No way, ma'am." It's a nice story, Tom. A true story, Miss Nancy. She nodded without comment, nibbling her cone. He was right, of course. They were both destined to walk in difficult shoes. His shoes and hers were of a different kind, though. There, but for the grace of God, go I. Most people would say in hushed tones upon meeting someone like Tom. A lot of those same people would have other words for the likes of her. She finished her cone, paid Tom, and went to one of the park benches where her daughter was sitting. Carrie Mae couldn't eat her ice cream fast enough, and it was already beginning to drip down the cone. Her hands were sticky, and, when that happened, she liked to put the fingertips of her index and thumb together and see how the skin stretched as she tried to separate them. As Nancy wiped her with a tissue, the girl kept looking at Tom, fascinated, as if trying to decipher his strangeness at a safe distance. "Don't stare at him, sweetheart. It's rude." "Why is that man so ugly, Ma? What happened to his face?" "His name is Tom. He was born like that. He's a normal person like you and me. It's just that his face is different." "Oh, he was a child like that? Why, did his mom love him with that face?" "Of course his mother loved him. Moms love their children very much." "And God?" "Of course God loves him. God loves everyone." "And if God loves him, why did he make him so ugly, Ma?" "Oh, I don't know, dear. Your mom doesn't have all the answers. Hey, let's go play instead." Nancy pushed her daughter on the swing. "Higher, higher," demanded the girl incessantly, and her laughter soared with her to the sky, and then helped her climb up the slide and caught her at the bottom. Carrie Mae wanted to get on the seesaw, but there was no child to counterbalance her at the other end. She sat there anyway, and Nancy tried to push the device up and down with her arms, but it was too heavy. As it happened to her sometimes, she felt guilty for not giving Carrie Mae a little brother or sister before. But kids were expensive. She and Melvin had decided that it was better to welcome a second child into their own house, not crammed into a rented one with just 2 bedrooms, and it took them a good while to save the money for the down payment, next year if things worked out. When they were done, Nancy and Carrie Mae stopped by the truck to say goodbye. During all that time, only the 3 of them were in the park, like outcasts in their own private purgatory. The girl still glanced furtively at the ice cream man, and Nancy, despite liking him, despite her efforts to treat him naturally and look him in the eye without staring away at the incongruous bulges in his face, to not feel in her gut a mixture of repulsion and compassion, had to acknowledge to herself that his face would take some getting used to, maybe if she saw him often, as it had happened with little Marcus. "Will you come back again sometime soon?" she asked Tom. "Not likely, Miss Nancy. I'm covering for a colleague who's sick. But you can find me not too far from here. Tuesdays and Thursdays at Westfield, Wednesdays and Fridays at Willow Creek, and weekends at Peach Blossom Terrace. Feel free to drop by any day. Much more neighborly folks in those places, you'll see." On their way home, they passed again in front of the for sale sign. Nancy knew that those signs would likely soon spread throughout the block. It had happened already in other neighborhoods and in other cities. Newspaper articles had been published about the phenomenon. She knew it was their neighbors' biggest fear. Sometimes she imagined their conversations at dinner time, behind closed curtains and shut doors, behind those hostile facades. Now that the Pinketts had arrived, should they sell quickly and get out while they still could, before the prices of their homes plummeted like a stone down into the sea, or should they stay and try to contain the tide? She and Carrie Mae kept on walking, always holding hands. Their house was now only a block and a half away. All of a sudden, Nancy felt unease. She turned her head around swiftly and saw a crew-cut, brown-haired man in a buttoned-down plaid shirt standing in the middle of the sidewalk a few feet behind him. He took a long drag on his cigarette, his squinting eyes focused on her. "Let's hurry up, baby. Let's not keep your dad waiting anymore," she said to Carrie Mae, hastening the pace and squeezing her daughter's hand. As they walked, Nancy pricked up her ears, trying to catch the sound of the man's footsteps behind them. She felt her armpits, her forehead drenched in sweat. They crossed the street almost running. Once they were on the other side, on the safe side, where they could now see their home, Nancy turned around. The man was still standing on the same spot, his eyes still fixed on her. He threw down the butt of his cigarette, stamped it out, and then turned on his heel and started walking in the opposite direction. "Dad, Dad!" yelled Carrie Mae as she pulled her mother's hand. Melvin looked like a stick figure in the distance, a few houses down the street. The child kept on pulling, trying to break free and run towards her father. Her little girl was a paper kite that wanted to fly, and the wind was blowing strong. But Nancy didn't want to let her loose, not yet. They reached the edge of their front yard. Melvin lifted his left arm and waved at them, while he used his right hand to wipe the sweat off his face with his hanky. He smiled with relief, and they smiled back. The paint can lay next to him, with the lid on. The words the strangers had written with giant letters on the facade of their home had now been covered for the third time since they had moved. But for how long before they reappeared? Sometimes Nancy imagined that the wood had a disease, an incurable fungus that always came back a few days after applying the treatment. Whites only. Negros get out. Each word was a bullet aimed at the three of them. Melvin, Nancy, and Carrie Mae. Even at the child that was yet to be conceived. Each word had stung Nancy's heart. Her consolation was that her daughter still could not read. "Daddy, Daddy!" Carrie Mae pulled harder. Melvin crouched down, extending both arms. Nancy loosened her grip and let go of her daughter. Carrie Mae ran fast to her father's embrace as Nancy watched her child, her paper kite, soar towards the bright blue sky. The end. Discussion questions. Number 1. Why is the title of the story Monsters? Number 2. The ice cream truck driver, Tom, says, "Tell me who gets the most frightened, the person who fears a spider because it seems hideous to him, or the spider facing a giant that can crush it with his foot." What does this sentence mean in the context of the story? Who do you think is the most frightened in the story? Number 3. Is Tom right? Is the antidote to fear of the unknown exposure? If that is the case, isn't the only way for the community to get over their fear for the Pinketts to move in? Number 4. Are the Pinketts brave or foolish for moving into a neighborhood that doesn't want them? Does the fact that they have a daughter change your answer? Number 5. How would you have answered Carrie Mae's question? If God loves him, why did he make him so ugly, Ma? Does this question also apply to the neighbors? If so, what is your answer? Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We always enjoy doing these, and I enjoy having you with us. Please like and subscribe. Please share with your friends. Next week, our story will be People Used to Die Every Day, from our February 2021 magazine. If you enjoyed this story, head over to our companion podcast, After Dinner Conversation Discussions, and listen to our discussions of this and other short stories from our magazine. We'll include a link in the description. And of course, you can always continue the discussion on our webpage in the comments section and on our Facebook page. Thank you for joining us. Bye.